I'd like to call this special council meeting to order. Before I do so, I want to acknowledge that the land upon which we are situated here in Town Hall and where the other members of council and staff are located is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe people, many of whom continue to live in this area and add to the richness of our community. Madam Clerk, the roll call, please.
All members of council are present, Your Worship.
There are no announcements currently, and there's no addendum. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? If there are none, then Councillor Noyes, you have a resolution for us to move into closed session.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Lubberts. The council does now go into closed session at 5:08 p.m. to discuss the following. Pursuant to Section 239 in brackets 2 in brackets B of the Municipal Act 2001, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, regarding Chief Administrative Officer performance evaluation, and B, pursuant to Section 239 in brackets 2 in brackets B of the Municipal Act 2001, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, regarding Chief Administrative Officer vacancy.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried. So before we go into closed session, I just want to ask each council to confirm that, I take it, Madam Clerk, this is just the ones that are coming in digitally, that you are alone and that you are not recording this meeting. And I will start with Councillor Noyes.
I am alone and I'm not recording this meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Butler?
I am alone and not recording this meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Lubberts?
I'm alone and not recording this meeting.
And Councillor Zanko?
I'm alone and not recording this meeting.
Thank you. All right, we're back in the council chamber, or some of us are. And Councillor Zanko, you have the resolution to allow council to rise from closed session.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Butler. The council does now rise and reconvene from closed session at 5:59 p.m. with respect to the following items. Item A, Chief Administrative Officer Performance Evaluation. Council rises with report that council approves the performance evaluation, that staff waive the grid, and that staff adjusts the CAO's salary as recommended. With regard to item B, the Chief Administrative Officer's vacancies, that we appoint Jonathan Jansen as interim CAO for 3 months commencing March 1st, 2022.
Have that all, Madam Clerk? That covers, okay. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried. That then takes us to consideration of bylaws. And Councillor McDermott, you have a resolution regarding that?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dubanow, that bylaw number 10-2022 to authorize the entry into and execution of a letter of agreement with Her Majesty the Queen in right of the Province of Ontario, represented by the Minister of Transportation under the dedicated gas tax funds for public transportation program is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried. That bylaw is on the floor for questions or comments. Are there any questions or comments? If not, then Councillor Lubberts, do you have the resolution for third and final reading of that bylaw?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Noyes. The bylaw number 10-2022 is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and the clerk under the corporate seal.
Any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried. Councillor Butler, you have first and second reading for the confirmatory bylaw.
I do. Thank you, Your Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Zanko that bylaw number 11-2022 to confirm the actions of council at its special council meeting held on February 2nd, 2022 is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried. And for third and final reading, Councillor Noyes, you have the resolution.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Lubberts that bylaw number 11-2022 is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and the clerk under the corporate seal.
All those in favor? None opposed? That is carried. Before we wind up this special council meeting, I just want to say that this will be the final, I think, unless we call another special council meeting, this will be the CAO Tom Cookett's final special council meeting with the town of Fort Erie. The other caveat is unless we can persuade him to stay longer. And in my heart, hope springs eternal. However, I just want to say that I can imagine that there have been many special council meetings over the years, Tom, that you have sat through. Many with this council because you've been our only CAO for this term and the previous term. And I know that you worked for the town even prior to that. So I'm hoping that your memories are fond and that you think of us in magnanimous terms in the future when you think about special council meetings or see other councils conducting meetings that aren't nearly as enjoyable because you're not there.
I've enjoyed every minute of it.
I can tell. Okay, Councillor Dubanow.
Yes, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McDermott, that council adjourns at 6:03 p.m. to reconvene into a regular meeting of council on February 28th, 2022.
All those in favor? That is carried. So unless anyone thinks that we need a break, I'm inclined to start up the budget meeting. Is that it? Is everyone in agreement with that? Okay, so then we're going to proceed into the Council and Budget Committee meeting number 3, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present, Your Worship.
Thank you. There are no announcements this evening. There's no addendum. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, then I am going to hand the meeting over to our budget chief, Councillor McDermott.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Our first presentation tonight will be Craig Schupelt, the CEO for the Fort Erie Public Library. So can we bring him in?
Can you hear us, Councillor McDermott?
Just barely.
Just barely.
I'm getting a little bit of feedback on my end, that's all. Is that any better?
That's better.
Sorry, we're just having technical difficulty. My voice is bouncing back to me. Okay, I think we're good now. Can you still hear us?
I can, but you're really going to have to speak right into that microphone for us.
Okay, all right. Let's get, we'll get our camera on here as well. All right, sorry about that. So I'm here with my board chair, Jerry McCutcheon. Thanks for having us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and hopefully I should be, have I been able to share my screen here? It looks like.
Yes, you can.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up our slides. And Jerry's just going to give kind of a quick recap of this past year, and then I will jump into our 2022 budget. I apologize again for the difficulties there. I think we're ready to go.
Your Worship and members of Council, my name is Jerry McCutcheon, and I'm the board chair for the Fort Erie Public Library. I'm going to take a few minutes of your time. First of all, to begin with, I want to thank the Friends of the Library. They are so unrelenting in all the efforts that they put together in order to make our library the best it can be. And secondly, I have to thank the staff, the frontline workers. They have been working so hard this year, like everybody else has, but with such a positive attitude. It has been just a pleasure working with this group of people. And just give you a very, very quick recap of what's been happening. In 2015, our CEO started a library consortium that comprised of 4 public libraries in Niagara College. At this point in time, every library in the region is with us except St. Catharines and Niagara Falls under his leadership. So that's been great for everybody in the area. Also, last year we were able to return $120,000 in cost containment savings and pass them on to you. And this is actually our second year of doing that. And we're very, very, very happy to do that and be able to be part of what is best for the whole community. As far as the QR codes go, we've had today only at the Fort Erie location 50 people come to have their vaccination cards laminated so that they can go out and take advantage of all the opportunities that are out there. And we have never had such positive feedback from the community. They're just so happy to be able to go out there and get out in public, and they just are so amazed that we're able to offer this service at no charge. So we're very, very happy to be doing that. And finally, just for looking at the circulation, we're obviously not back to the 2018 numbers, but we are growing we have grown from last year, and if things keep going in the same way, then we should be there, hopefully in a year, if not 2. So that's my very, very short presentation to you, and then I'll pass you over to our very able CEO, Craig Schukel.
Comments. Yeah.
All right. Let's get everything straight here. Okay. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties that were experienced at the beginning. Thanks for having us here tonight. It's good to see everybody, at least in some manner. I'd much rather be sitting in council chambers speaking to you guys, but I'm going to count on that for 2023. Although, to be honest, I was a few months ago counting on it for 2022. So next year we'll keep our fingers crossed. So again, I will go through our budget for 2022, touching slightly on 2023 and 2024. It shouldn't be too long a presentation. It won't take up too much of your time tonight. Start with the first slide. It's one that, again, I have in here every year. These are really what we consider our contractual obligations. The biggest by far. You've seen my budget. I did send it out to everybody a couple of weeks ago. It's always our staff wages and benefits. They make up 70% of our budget. which is obviously makes some sense considering what we do and that it is very customer service driven. We do have some other preventative maintenance contracts, and I'm going to touch on that slightly as we go into my presentation. Again, this is a document that I did send with my email a couple of weeks ago, which is our 2021 budget summary. We did have, as Jerry mentioned, we did give back $120,000 to the town. It shows the what I call a shortfall from the town of $150,000. I just wanted to explain that in case there was confusion. The remainder of that is just from money that's withheld for contracted services from the town. We were not actually withheld $150,000 when you factor in those amounts. It was the $120,000. Even with that, we did run a surplus. Again, I don't want to get too much into this. I think I explained a lot of it in the email, but our biggest savings was obviously in staffing. We had somebody off long-term disability for the full year. We had 2 long-term vacancies among part-time staff. We had an unexpected resignation midway or part way into the fall. And I had somebody go off on maternity leave a little bit earlier than expected. The other significant area of savings, materials, we just didn't purchase as much for 2 reasons. Number one, not as many things were released in 2020 and 2021. I think they've held back a lot of things. We're seeing more early in this year. And we also saved about $15,000 through eliminating our previous maintenance contract and taking care of small maintenance items on our own. We've actually been without a maintenance worker or maintenance contractor at the library for almost 2 years. It certainly worked. We've done okay during times of limited or lower service, but there's a few of us who can do the necessary things to keep things going, but it's something that we are going to have to change as we come back to full capacity. I think I don't think anybody's looking to take on too many maintenance hours among my staff. So I've got a couple of slides that I think are important, just our goals and objectives for the next 2 years. We have delayed some capital projects on which we are now moving forward. Our old boardroom will start work within the next week to be turned into 2 individual or small group workspaces, and more projects will begin in the spring. We were somewhat hesitant to move forward on some larger projects because of concerns about what changes might come about for libraries from the pandemic. We didn't know what we would look like coming out of it, when we would come out of it, what expectations might be out there in terms of what people expect from a space, right? Our goal over the next few months is to return to full programs and services as much as we are allowed by provincial guidelines. We are reintroducing in-person programming this month. And we're quite happy that the Monday of March break is actually the day when capacity expands from 10 to 25. That will allow us to do some moderately larger programs as much as we can up to the 25 following the safety requirements as far as masking, spacing, making sure it's a safe space for people coming in.
Excuse me, Mr. Schufelt.
Yes, of course.
Are you anticipating that your PowerPoint presentation is moving along?
Yes, is it not?
It isn't, and not exactly sure why, but I thought I'd alert you to that.
Let me just see. Hold on one second. That's odd. Okay, let me try this again. Thanks for your worship. Thank you for catching that. It just keeps going. When I try to do it, it keeps saying your screen sharing is paused, which is odd. So what do you see right now?
The first slide.
Okay.
So you may have to go down the list manually.
Yeah, are you seeing as I move through
Yep.
this now?
We are as you move down the... Yeah.
Oh, okay. I apologize then. So I was, especially for the budget, I'm speaking to numbers that you're not seeing on your screen. Okay. Okay. All right. So again, this is where I was at talking about our goals and objectives. So your worship, thank you for catching that. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, we have been without a maintenance contractor for well over a year, almost 2 years. We've been taking care of our own small needs in-house whenever possible, but we're at the point where we do need to have someone in on a regular basis. We are looking to use some of the funds for salaries this year to hire someone on what I've considered a very part-time basis, probably just coming in once a week. And we did have a retirement from the library. Our long-time business administrator, Maria Brigantino, is easing into retirement. So we are not going to be replacing her position as it was, but we are going to be creating a position related to that we will be filling on a part-time basis. So now moving into our 2022 budget request. Our budget request this year is, as you can see, is the $1,584,818, an increase of $18,000 or 1.1% over last year, following 0% last year. Obviously with the pandemic, we had agreed on the 0%. We're also reducing our development charge request from $45,000 to $30,000, as we don't plan to expand our collection until we're fully out of restrictions and we know where we're going over the next couple of years. And I did mention, just touching on the overall dollar amount, I'd mentioned earlier that salaries are by far our most significant contributor. And again, in 2022, I did want to make it clear that we will continue to see some of these absences. I'm still waiting for one employee to come back from long term. I'm in the middle of trying to fill a maternity vacancy, and we do have another temporary position that I'm trying to fill. So there will be some cost savings, and I've spoken to Mr. Jensen about this already, the fact that we will likely have these same discussions this year as we've had last year and the year before in terms of possibly cost containment and giving back some funds. The reason why I was hesitant to look at what we might actually spend this year is that I base all of my salaries and benefits on full staffing. My concern being that if you build into your budget some of those things you expect to happen during the year, you may be okay for that year, but then the next year when you come back with full staffing, you're looking at a much more significant ask. So again, I would much prefer to staff fully, and if there are funds left, then again, that's something we can discuss. I think we've been a pretty good partner the past couple of years in terms of certainly looking at cost containment and giving back money that we're not using. Our supplementary revenue for 2022, provincial grant remains stagnant. Again, I think I've mentioned before, it's been a couple of decades since that number has changed. You can look at it as being disappointing, but it's better than seeing it being reduced or eliminated. So I think you can look at it either way. We are expecting to lose about $6,000 in revenues in the fines, fees, and rentals line from past years, excuse me, because at their December board meeting, our library board made the decision to go fine-free. They made that, just to explain, they made that decision based on a number of factors. The most important ones being that fines, from all studies I've read, really don't deter people from returning materials late. And fines are obviously inequitable in that they impact people differently based on how difficult or how easy it might be to pay library fines. We might not see it as a big deal to owe $5. For some people, that's a deal breaker, and it means we're likely not going to see them again at the library. Several libraries in the Niagara region, including Lincoln, West Lincoln, have gone this way, Port Colborne as well. Others are looking at it, and bigger systems as well. London and Ottawa are two in Ontario that come to mind. They have gone fine-free as well. This is my 3-year snapshot. Again, we're looking at the 1.1% increase for this year, 1.9, 1.9 for the next 2 years. Again, I always caution these numbers can change during the year. For example, last year's presentation, I indicated that we would be requesting 1.8% this year, and that the following year, 2023, would be 2.5. And again, these numbers can change, and we always do our best to work within the guidelines that we are given, usually through discussion with corporate services as to what kind of increase or what kind of ask they would expect us to fall within. A couple of comparison slides with libraries in the region. I always include this one to show where we stand in the region in terms of per capita operations funding. This is from 2020. We've typically been at or near the top. Pelham has jumped us. I think they had some extra funding because they built a branch a couple of years ago in 2020, or put more money towards it in 2020. But again, we are always at or near the top. These monies wouldn't include, we would slide down a little bit given the money we gave back in 2020. But again, I like this slide. It's impressive. It shows that our library is well supported by council, by our taxpayers, by our community. I'd like to see us. I wouldn't want to be on the far right side of this, so I think we're in a nice spot. And again, another slide I always like sharing, because we've been the highest for a long time, is in terms of service hours. This slide has been updated to reflect current hours, as some libraries like ours have come back to full service hours while others haven't. For example, in the region during January, 5 libraries were open. 5 were offering curbside only and 2 were offering hybrid, the 2 depending on the branch. One more comment too that I want to make before I move on from this slide is I'm really proud of the fact that we have been at the forefront of libraries reopening, providing full hours and service as much as possible throughout the pandemic. In the region, we have always been at the very front. And I know Jerry mentioned it, but I also just wanted to give a thanks to library staff because they deserve the credit for it. Changing schedules, changing rules, working in close proximity to members of the public. None of these things have affected them. They've done a great job of providing customer and community service in a safe manner during a tough time. So really can't say enough about that. These are our account balances as of December 31st, 2021. I'd indicated in my email to you, I was expecting a surplus of $37,000. It came out to just under $41,000. The other 2 accounts, our operating reserve is exactly what it sounds like, a reserve account that we could dip into if we were running a shortage during the year, instead of coming to council to ask for funds or dipping into our capital reserve. And our capital reserve right now is at slightly over $205,000. We do have a number of outstanding projects for completion over the next couple of years, and I'm going to talk about those on the next couple of slides. As I mentioned, we've got about $205,000. If we were to transfer the other money, it'd give us around $245,000. That would be enough to cover most of what I think I've got included on these slides. I say that with the caveat that I don't know what's going to happen with building and costs of materials, which have been going through the roof, but it would certainly be a healthy balance for us. And it would avoid us coming back to council to ask for formal capital requests. We did one a few years ago, and the front half of the Centennial branch is amazing. We've had so many compliments about it, but I would rather do those using the money we have, certainly before we come back. Crystal Ridge does need a facelift. The furniture and colors are a throwback to the time that it was built. And the service desk takes up a rather significant portion of the front of the library, similar to what we had at Centennial. And we've changed that, and it's just made an enormous difference. Stevensville is a small branch, but I think we have the ability to open that up using smaller shelving, some nicer seating, and making it more of a gathering space. And I think that Centennial has gotten a lot of the attention over the past couple of years, so I do think we need to be looking at what we're doing out in Crystal Ridge and Stevensville. I mentioned the boardroom being changed at the Centennial branch. That's what the creation of the small meeting spaces is going to be. It was supposed to start a couple of weeks ago, but actually it was affected by somebody on the contractors having COVID. So it's the first time we've had it. Thankfully, we haven't had anything at the library in terms of staff having it, but it's affecting our contractors. And we are likely going to put together a tender package for the remainder of the Centennial branch in the next couple of months. As I mentioned, the renovations we did over the past couple of years look great, but now it's almost, I don't know, those of you who have been in here would understand what I mean, but you can certainly see literally the line where the renovations cut off. The carpeting's different. There's a line over the carpet, and everything in front of it looks fresh and new, and the back of it certainly needs to be done to match the rest of it. So some of these projects, as I said, would have happened in 2021, but we delayed making those decisions because we weren't sure about the restrictions. And again, like I said, we really weren't sure what libraries were going to look like coming out of this. Now it seems like people are ready to come back. It seems like we can go back to being what we were without too many changes. You know, we'll still be careful about the way we're seating people, making more, like I said, with the small meeting spaces, maybe more quiet spaces, private spaces where people might feel safe. But from our library users, I think they're ready to come back as well, which gives me confidence in the direction we're going. And again, I wanted to keep it brief. That is our presentation. I'm certainly open to any questions. Thanks, guys.
Thank you both for being here tonight. Are there any comments or questions with regards to Mr. Schupel's presentation? Seeing none, thank you so much, Mr. Schupel and Mr. McCutcheon. I just want to say one thing, that ever since you've been here budget after budget. You're very thoughtful, and you're caring for the money of the constituents. Something that you don't see very often. And on behalf of Council, I appreciate that very much.
Could I just say one quick thing, Councillor McDermott?
So you're off the hook for the night then, so
Sure.
thank you.
Can I
I'm
say one more
sorry.
thing? I just had one more comment. Is that all right?
I can hear it.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if you could hear me. I just want to say thank you for the past several years, just because I know this is an election year, and next year I might not be speaking to all the same people around this table, or I don't know what we call it tonight, not around chambers, around your homes and your offices. But again, it's been a pleasure. For those who aren't here next time, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Much. So we'll move on to our corporate services. Jonathan Jansen.
Okay, thank you for bearing with me while we set up here. I'm just going to open my presentation as well. Okay. Everyone can see that? Oh, yeah. All right, thank you very much, Chair, and the rest of Council and everyone attending. Tonight is the 2022 levy budget presentation. Thanks again to Craig and your board and all your staff and all that you do for the town and for your presentation tonight. It's always a pleasure working with you and your team. So tonight's budget presentation we'll be reviewing is available on the town's website, along with all the others we've done this year. If you look under the government tab and go to budgets and finances, it's under the budget info section, and it's entitled 2022 General Levy Budget. So the agenda for tonight is very much in keeping with prior years. We'll go through and look at some of the key underlying factors and inputs for the budget, as well as some of where we're at wrapping up the 2021 year. And then we'll work through all the different components of this year's presented and proposed 2022 budget, looking at ultimately the proposed impact for the median household in Fort Erie, some risks and opportunities, and look at what the next steps are remaining at this point. I do have a slide for each supplementary item that Council has as a slide that you can follow along on screen for those that want to do it that way as well. So we are in the final year of Council's strategic plan, which is a significant factor when we have in mind as we bring forward the budget, particularly with the supplementary items beyond what our base services are, so that we're able to address some of the key areas that Council has set forward as strategic areas to address. This year, again, with COVID-19, much like Craig was sharing, we will again be looking at the ways that will impact our revenues and expenses for 2022. We are proposing some use of reserves for that with funding that we've received. And again, things are changing, especially the last couple of weeks, so it is difficult, especially when we're preparing this in the last couple of months, to know where things might go or land, but we've done our best to capture some of those changes. Long-term financial planning, The budget planning report back in October set the groundwork for some of the issues and challenges, pressures we were anticipating already at that point. As you know from what I presented in our capital budget, the CPI back at that point was referenced at 3.5% for CPI. That has since then only grown. It was 4.8% or so at the time of the capital budget, and it's grown since then as well. And then lastly, budget input, we do have corporate services subcommittee in discussions with various members at times to see what types of targets and limits might best apply for the town in relation to tonight's total tax bill increase. This is just an overview of the budgets that were proposed for 2021. The largest one being the levy that we're looking at tonight, the $36 million. That's more than what we're approving with the tax levy. It also does include some non-tax revenues that the town spends. So it's a combination of approximately $30 million in tax revenue and $6 million in non-tax revenue that the town spends. And then, of course, the other two areas. I just would want to point as well to the budget book. It is a large undertaking to compile all the documents as well as summarize the prior year's operating results in a book, and that is available on our website for anyone that would want to see more of. It does go into a lot of background, a lot of the economic realities and guidance we use for preparing the budget, a lot of good description on how our reserves are used and how they're funded, things like that. That's all available on the website there. So when we look at the 2021 budget that we approved last year, here's a general breakdown by percentage. You can see that 33% is the largest area there. That is for roads and transit, and just a broad array of town services. Again, the details for this would be in that budget book I referred to. And the total tax bill, just for context, when we present the budget, we talk about the total town impacts as well as the total tax bill impacts. And what that includes is not only the lower tier, the Fort Erie portion, but that we collect on behalf of the region of Niagara, as well as the province for educational purposes. So we collected for 2021 a total of $65.7 million, of which the region and province is over half at about 56% of the tax bills that residents receive. Council is in their final year of their term, so I won't go over as much of the background of the calculation of taxes this year, but I do provide, and I have some graphs following that show some of the comparisons in some really key, important year-to-year ways that we show how Fort Erie compares. So for 2021, it's the report, the study for the province of Ontario that's most recently available. The Fort Erie total taxes were $3,391 compared to an average of, in the Niagara region, of $3,821. And important to note is the residential taxpayer is the most common taxpayer for Fort Erie. It's the largest part of our assessment at almost 90%. So we do present most things for the residential taxpayer, but the study does go and show comparisons in a lot of other key areas, like a two-story, a multi-residential, hotel, motel, and so on. And we do compare favorably to the average with those as well. So here is the comparison by chart of all Niagara municipalities. All information was available for all 12 municipalities for this last year. You can see then, and this again is just for a like property, a bungalow with a certain prescribed number of square feet and so on that is compared. Of note this year is that Hamilton was dropped out of our group. I think thankfully that helps us within Niagara compare a little bit better because that did change some of the averages. But here you can see that Fort Erie is, we are 11% below average, and we are the second lowest in Niagara when you look at tax on like properties. And as I do share in our water and wastewater budget as well, it's important to compare the municipal burden in total because there's so many different variations in the way that amounts are assigned or allocated between the tax levy and the water and wastewater budget. For example, our program support is our overhead costs for billing and collections that not only is used for our taxes, but also for water and wastewater. So when we look at the total, that's why the number is going up to a total for Fort Erie. I didn't actually include that number in my notes here, but you can see that Fort Erie this year has moved lower, as we noted in the other presentation, to the fourth lowest spot in Niagara. So this is again the total of taxes and all the utilities that the town bills. And it's also important to note with this one that includes the town being in the position that it is in with its infrastructure as well, where we have a very well-funded, if not fully funded, infrastructure long-term plan. So we are in a good position and we have addressed those needs. So that's great, great news for this council. So for 2021, we are now in the process of doing a lot of work corporately, in corporate services and finance and with others to try and wrap up as much of the 2021 outstanding payments and adjustments. There's lots of work that the town does, particularly with projects that have multi-year impacts or that carry on from the operating budget over multiple years. So we're doing accruals, adjustments, things like that for that. The quarterly variance reports, the second bullet there, these are reports we're bringing to council throughout the year for the second and third quarters, and then at year end as well with the annual audited statements. Those results are, as indicated in the third quarter report, hyperlinked there, showing that we are trending to a surplus, thankfully, this year for both the levy and the water and wastewater. So that's great news for the town and for our staff. Restricting and doing their best to restrict spending where they can and to generate those surpluses. The audit is something that will be done late spring to confirm and finalize those results. It's reviewed by our audit committee, and we do present that typically in summer to council with any kind of recommendations to allocate funds that were in excess of what we would normally transfer in accordance with our reserve policy to different reserve needs. And just a few highlights there of some balances that we open unaudited, but that we are opening in 2022. We have levy debt of $2.2 million. It's 4.7 if you include water wastewater, but that is a separate budget. So that is very low debt, relatively low debt. We have $9.9 million in levy reserves that are operating in nature. There's a number of key strategic reserves that council has created, like our industrial land development reserve. We have a number of reserves for even for this coming year with an election to fund those items like that. And then $20 million for capital reserves, as was discussed in our capital budget. This is a slide I've added this year that it's based on 7 key financial indicators defined by the province and shared with all municipalities. It's both for sustainability and for financial flexibility indicators. And so these are 7 areas that the province has said are important in comparing ourselves. So I'll just run through these in brief. The total taxes receivable, that's an indication of how well we're doing on collecting on the levy. We are billing the levy out in February and for 4 installments throughout the year, but our ability to collect on that, we do some calculations at the end of the year to come up with that figure. So the Fort Erie number is most recently reported as 5.9% compared to our Southern Niagara lower tier group of a 6.3%. So all the items in green we are comparing favorably to the other groups and to the averages. Another one is item 3, reserves as a percentage of operating expenditures. So this is one where we've been anticipating this the last few years, and we have now surpassed the provincial average with that. So we've set some ambitious targets, and we have some identified some real needs and ways of planning to use those funds, but that is just above the provincial average you can see there. And then on the flexibility side, debt, as you saw in the last slide, our debt servicing costs are very low at 1.6%. And then the one that is just slightly above the provincial average is our amortization as a percentage of capital asset cost. What that means is that the age of our infrastructure, the age of our assets is slightly older because there's more that we've amortized over their life than average in Ontario. There's many municipalities that have a much younger or newer assets due to their age and so on. So we would expect that one in some ways to be a little bit higher. A brief summary for COVID for this year. There are a number of federal and provincial responses. Of course, we did highlight in previous reports to Council some of the funding that we've received. We continue to do some monitoring and reporting to the province for that. We have attached as Appendix 4 to the report again this year. EDTS has done a great job of capturing some of the key supports they have provided throughout COVID. I think it's really timely for us to highlight some of those things. They've done a lot of work working with businesses and other taxpayers to do what they can to help leverage other areas of support and themselves to lend support for businesses in particular. The tax collection rate, I've just updated it further to the previous slide for 2021. That's at 5.3%. So that's a real important indicator for us during COVID is, we know particularly early on, we did offer some waiving of penalties and interest, knowing that there would be some cash flows, particularly before some of those programs from the province and the federal government were rolled out. So that has decreased, which is great news. It's a great indicator to look at for how well the town is able to collect on taxes. And then for 2022, the last bullet there is just to focus on, again, our goal was to use reserves where available to focus on as low a tax increase as we thought was prudent. Last year, the tax increase we brought forward was 0.32% for the town and 0.9% for the total tax bill. So as you'll see, it is higher than that this year, but again, we're trying to build on managing that overall level given the pressures we have as well. Certainly inflation is a headline you see often these days, so that's something that we're tracking and knowing is a pressure for this budget as well. So for the base budget for 2022, moving on to looking at what's being proposed tonight for 22, the overall base budget, so that's all of our existing services items previously approved, are a decrease of 1.68%. And there's two components to that. You'll see in the chart coming up, it's a 0.61% increase over last year, but it's also reflecting the assessment growth that the town has seen from development and growth of assessment in town. So the Appendix 1 in Report CBC 06 highlights the base budget changes from 2021. It highlights those, and we'll get to those in a minute. And this is really no change. This just does highlight the way we present the budget with providing last year's year-to-date actuals and approved budgets, the amounts proposed for 2022, and then forecasts as well for 23 and 24. And just highlight some of the different categories we use in presenting and summarizing this information to Council. And you do have in your package from Finance some more detailed reporting by departments and division related to those. So revenues for 2022, we will highlight a number on this page. The $48,000, and I'll just clarify too, it's sometimes brackets with accountants are easily confusing for some and for us even at times. But in this case, a negative is an increase to the total budget. So a negative is decreasing the total budget. So negative is a good number for 22, and a positive means it's increasing the total amount we need to collect in taxes. So the OMPF grant, it was decreased over last year, so that's why it's a positive 48,000. And the others, with the one exception, are all decreases because revenues are increasing. So you'll see in the second line there, the largest one is the $326,000 in increases we've put in through the budget to reflect our building and planning fee revenues really continue to be strong. We're always looking at doing our best to track what is in queue for the future, to know how sustainable those revenues truly are. We do expect, and you'll see in some of the 23 and 24 forecasts and what we're looking at with future rates, for that to come down. So we're always trying to balance off, do we reflect more of that revenue or capture it now while we can, and then just deal with the increases in the future. So we have increased that substantially by that $326,000. The $140,000 is short-term rental, and you'll see that STR as an acronym for that occasionally. That is the amount that's being proposed to increase related to Council's approved program for short-term rental licensing. You'll see later there's a related supplementary request for staffing that program. That's something that was brought forward earlier with the reports. We are capturing some increases to parking and beach admission revenues. The town had a very strong year this last year despite COVID, and at times due to lifting of restrictions in that area. So this is capturing some of that for this year as well. We are, similar to the development area, we're increasing our tax supplementals for the year. And what those are tax revenues that come in throughout the year. We get about 7 different mailings or submissions from MPAC to let us know what assessments are increasing from growth throughout the year. So that's reflecting the fact that has been increased the last few years and keeping up with that trend as well. Bank and investment income, that is a heading in the wrong direction. We're still phasing in, this is year 2 of phasing in the reality that with COVID, our bank and investment income, which was previously over $700,000, has been impacted by that with lowered rates. There are expectations that those rates will rebound, and we've included that in our analysis for 22, but that is the year 2 of bringing that down, and we, as you'll see in the report, we are using some funding as well to address that. And then all other items for revenues is $43,000. And then just to separate out on the revenue side some of the COVID impacts for this year, there's about $506,000 that we are proposing, all with emergency management reserve, which is where we did transfer some of our funding from the province. So if we weren't to fund these from that reserve, that would be an additional 1.74% pressure on our levy. So this is a reserve and it's emergency in nature, and we believe now is the time to use it. So there's a number of areas there, everything from our gaming expected to still be impacted with the not being able to run a full events related to that, and the revenues the town receives from that. Business licenses we have waived for this coming year as well. We did that during our fees and charges budget report. And we've netted together their last 2 lines there, the impacts for our arenas. So that is revenue impacts net of some operational savings, utilities, for example, for our arenas, some staffing. So those are both net of those savings. So the total of all those is $506,000, all of which we will fund, believing it to be, again, hopefully mitigated this year, but hoping that this is something more temporary in nature. And you can see the breakdown of by source for revenues, the largest one being the tax levy for the town, that is 79%. And then moving to expenses, just to highlight some of these, there's an increase of $731,000 in expenses, the largest being wages and benefits. Similar to the library, that is the largest component of our costs. We're very service-oriented in the programs we deliver. And that's in keeping with our negotiated collective bargaining agreements and using negotiated benefit changes as well with our providers. We are increasing expenses for a couple of our reserve contributions. This relates specifically to some savings in our community health and wellness area. So we're repurposing those savings to an increased contribution for the hospital, so we get to our targeted commitment for the Niagara South Hospital earlier. As well as we've spent and done a lot of work over the last number of years with recruitment and attraction of physicians. So we are realizing that we need more funds. That reserve is getting very, very low. The capital reserve transfers, that's items that would have actually been seen as well through the capital budget. That is a 3.5% increase to all of our capital reserve transfers. It's also some increases in amortization for new assets, some minor impacts for capital budget additions. I note later in the forecast section, but we have a number of capital budget items that are new this year that will have future impacts that are greater due to the timing of construction and so on. Winter operations, we're able to realize some savings with our program of $63,000. A large pressure for municipalities is the insurance through a number of reasons, but that $115,000 is an approximately 14 or 15% increase in the town's insurance premiums and the amounts that we pay for our under-deductible amounts. So that's a large pressure. We are actually faring quite well compared to some others, which I've heard there's a lot of pressure on the insurance side for municipalities. And then the last one is just, I'm summarizing here some of the expense impacts for COVID, not as much as on the revenue side, but we still are providing, for example, facility screeners at facilities such as Town Hall, some protective equipment, extra advertising, and so on, all of which are funded from the Emergency Management Reserve. The largest item of these is the transit services. So we changed to an on-demand model for this year. So this is capturing all the benefits of that for the coming year. Those are excellent savings. Again, there are future costs with amalgamation that we'll note later that all but eliminate those for the future. Debt costs are changing only slightly this year. We did approve some debt later, which I'll talk about, but that is not until the construction is complete. The library amount as presented in their report, and note that's slightly different than the total grant amount because we also include with our payment to them some net changes with, we also provide their insurance, we provide IT support, so that change is net of the couple other factors we adjust annually with them. There are some other grant partnership decreases like the one I mentioned earlier, there's an annual nurse practitioner payment that we've been able to end, and so that factors into that total, and all others are $119,000 to the base budget. A breakdown again by type, as I mentioned, the largest being wages and benefits. And then just getting into assessment. So this is a year, again, similar to last year, where there's not as much change, especially on the reassessment side, but of note first is that for assessment growth, this is one of our larger years where for 2022, the town is able to have 2.29% in assessment growth. So that for every new home and for every expansion of build or assessment in the town, that is reflected in this budget. We are capturing that to keep this rate lower. So that is an excellent number for the town. And then the reassessment is the one where as you may recall from last year's budget, there was no assessment. That was year 5. That was already a 1-year delay from MPAC of when they were supposed to send out reassessments to all our taxpayers. That's now been delayed in the last couple of months to an additional 2 years. So there's no phase-in impacts for this year. There's the whole discussion on reassessment impacts is not an issue for this budget. That won't next be an issue until 2024. We've highlighted some of those concerns in report CBC 05. Following 2024, there's going to be a number of challenges for our taxpayers. Particularly when there's changes and shifts between our residential and non-residential tax base, as well as just some variation that will inevitably happen at that point. So that will be a challenge for us to work together and mitigate those changes in the 2024 budget. So all of these base changes, again, this is, as I mentioned near the start, these are all factored together to be a decrease to the town's budget of 1.68%. And that if you're just looking at our base before we consider all the supplementary items being proposed, for the median household is a decrease of 1.74% at the top right. And we've also presented it here for all the changes with the region and provincial education amount as well. So for the supplementary, this year, we have 22 items. That is extraordinary, but I think we've captured in the report in particular how a number of them are strategic. A number of them are reflecting the growth, much like the short-term rental revenue and the planning revenue that you will see in the base budget. So in some ways, these could be included in the base because a lot of them are supporting what we are needing to do to keep our base services going. But we like to include them as decision units, we call them, for town. So we're that much more transparent and you're able to have that much more input and comment directly on some of those changes. And these are brought forward in these 4 parts that follow. So the first part has $408,000 in requests. So these are all items that are part of the budget annually going forward. And these are items that council has seen in earlier reports. I've included, I think, most of the references and hyperlinks in the report that's in the e-agenda and on the website. So the first 2 are both infrastructure related, the $54,000 for bridge and culvert refurbishing. Both the first 2, I should say, are year 2 of 2 items that we brought in last year and phased them in over 2 years to soften the impact. And again, I will go into each of these in more detail later when we have the slides and when we have the forms to look at some of the benefits and the descriptions of each program. But these are the 6 items that impact the ongoing base costs of the town. The most recent one being 1.6 there for $66,000 as presented a couple of weeks ago in the Living Wage Initiative report. Then there are $295,000 in one-time costs, of which $145,000 are reserve funded. So those are, again, all following council reports and include the mental health clinic, the walk-in clinic, a review of short-term rental land use controls, secondary plan studies, as well as climate change studies and initiatives. So these are all areas that staff are bringing forward in consultation with mayor and council, and in a number of other areas or items that are strategic in nature. These total $601,000, and this is the area as well that includes the majority of the staffing. And again, I would just note that when it comes to particularly some of those planning items, the staffing, they are in relation to a lot of the revenue as well. So that is something important to keep in mind with approving those. And lastly, for supplementary, there's 6 items that are one-time in nature, totaling $488,000. A couple of ditching improvement projects, the former Ridgeway Works Yard, an environmental study for phase 2, and a new official plan, and so on. So the total of all those 4 areas is $1.16 million. You'll see there that's net of some of the funding that we've brought forward to keep that lower. So the total of all those is 3.97%. And the total of the base and all of these supplementary items is 2.29%. So that's from the bottom of Appendix 2 in the report for the total budget. It's not for the median household, which we present in a little bit, but that is the total increase of the budget itself. Some context from recent years. The dark blue graph here is the total town tax increase as a percentage over the prior year, and the dark orange is the total tax bill again. So you can see in the lightly shaded one, second from the left, is the base only. So again, you can see that negative 1.68% that we talked about. But on the far left, ultimately, we're talking, that's the amount for the total of all supplementaries. And that's compared to the last previous 5 years. And what that is it's 2.15% if you're looking down the middle percent change column near the top. 2.15% for the median household with the assessment at $200,300. And when you factor in the regional increase and the education, which is not changing, it's a 2.2% increase. So I just present this in a couple different ways. One is for the median household, which is something that's quite common for municipalities, and that's the total increase there, change year over year of $29 for the year. That's compared to, we present it for every $100,000 of assessment, so you can factor out what your own house might be impacted. And for every $100,000 in assessment, it's a $15 change for the year. Some budget risks and opportunities to look at. So first on the risk side, again, inflation. The most recent rate for Ontario was 5.2%. And more importantly, our budget is very construction and infrastructure related, and that has been much higher. I know the percentage that was released around capital budget time was actually 11.6%. So a lot of pressures on the inflation side. The risk for the town is that we're only increasing our capital increases or transfers by 3.5%, but the reality is that's not properly keeping up with the impacts on what we need to contribute to keep that program going. So we will have a multi-year review of that. We'll continue to monitor that to the extent such that if inflation were to be lower in some of the future years, we would likely consider a higher rate to try and address that. But that is a risk in this budget. COVID-19, we've talked about revenue and expense risks for 2022 and beyond. We've forecasted our interest rates, we've looked at our facility use and so on. So that's another risk. Reserve reliance, this budget is using a total of $1.2 million in reserves. Most of all the supplementary items that are one-time in nature are reserve funded, as well as all the COVID impacts as well. Some annual provincial and federal, both policy and funding risks that we often talk about. Again, the asset management, this is more the place that I suppose I should have spoken about the infrastructure costs and economic factors. We're subject to risks as well as an opportunity on interest rates in a year where we had initially planned to do more or incur more debt. Those higher rates are negative, but to the extent that we can minimize some of our investment income revenues, that is a positive as well. And of course, as you know, fuel, utilities are ongoing pressures as well. Assessment, I did talk a little bit already about some of the risks with that reassessment delay. We would expect come 2025 that with it being a total of a 7-year instead of a 4-year reassessment cycle, that there would be exceptionally higher assessment appeals and things of that nature when that time comes. So there's some longer term risk there as well. Regional taxes, the region in April, I note later, that's when they bring forward any tax policy change. It's been fairly stable the last number of years, so I'm not too concerned about what we may see at this point for that, but that is always a regional discussion that we follow and give input as area treasurers. And then environmental, as you saw earlier, climate change and other emergent issues or threats continue to be a real factor for us with our programs. Opportunities, the taxpayer and business supports, we've noted those as opportunities that staff is taking to address and mitigate some of the impacts with the pandemic. With COVID-19, we are monitoring and applying for whatever we think and wherever it's reasonable to submit for funding for that. There's a lot of ongoing reporting for that in the coming year. We are similarly with regular funding doing whatever we can to take advantage of funding. Technology, that's been the subject of a few reports recently where we are taking advantage of modernization funding that the province has put out that will have opportunities for making our processes more efficient, for making our customer service that much more effective. So real opportunity with cost as well, but right now we're fortunate to have some of that funding for that. And then the assessment base, that's always an opportunity where, particularly when we put forward a program with contributing annually to industrial land development needs, that can only help our opportunity to increase our non-residential tax base and to seek a little bit more balance in that area. The forecast is for beyond 2022. Again, we're seeing some of these pressures building up in the future. It's currently sitting at a forecast for 23 of 6.3%, which is not a number we're fond of, but that does include the transit amalgamation increased costs. In the report, it does comment on that, there are associated enhancements to our services related to that, and we will work with the region to make sure that cost is addressed and mitigated as much as possible. I would highlight as well here the debt comment. We did receive, we were ecstatic to have the announcement of the MDRA funding back before Christmas, and that will alleviate some of the forecasted debt we had included in our budget. We did in our capital budget have two items that were not MDRA funded that had debt, both the Jarvis Street improvements as well as there was one other one. The upcoming completion of the fire hall, the amalgamated fire station. But there are two larger debts in particular that we will see the benefits of using that substituted funding of MDRA, which is the Municipal Disaster Recovery Assistance Fund, to reduce that as well. I commented earlier with the capital program, there are some impacts for future years that are much larger once those assets come into productive use. For example, the splash pad, requires a lot of costs for water, for equipment maintenance, for some staffing, things like that. Supplementary phase-ins. When we go through the supplementaries, you'll note that some of them have phasing in over 2 years, particularly when it's staff and we're trying to be realistic in only including for 2022 what the expected cost would be, but they may have a future year cost that's increased then as well. There's the affordable housing, which we're phasing into a larger amount over 2 years, so that has an impact for next year as well. Transit, as noted up above, and then other market increases have been factored in as well. So a conclusion, some of the key messages is that the base budget, so with what the town is currently providing, separate from the 22 decision units in the supplementary, is a decrease of 1.68, which does capture all of the assessment growth from this last year. We have total supplementary budget increases of 3.97, which addresses additional staffing needs and strategic enhancements. All of the COVID-19 revenue and expense pressures have used reserve funding and to reduce and eliminate 2022 impacts. And then bottom line there is the tax bill changes. It's an increase to the tax bill for the median household in Fort Erie of 2.15% for town services and 2.2% for the total tax bill. So we have set aside additional meetings should council have further inquiries or follow-up requests. Otherwise, we have scheduled February 28th for bylaws. That would be for the general levy operating as well as the part of our capital budget that we always say we split because it needs the support of our levy for the 2022 contributions to fund that. April is when the tax policy and ratios come forward. We bring forward a tax rate bylaw, and then in June, we do the town's final tax bills. In the report, these are the 9 different parts for recommendations that ultimately we'll be asking council to approve tonight. These items are at the bottom of Appendix 2, but it really is a good summary of the total amounts in those key areas. And just to recap, because this is the last meeting, the capital budget this year was $23.6 million. The water and wastewater operating budget was a 3.45% increase, and tonight's operating budget is a 2.15% increase. Again, I just want to really thank a lot of our staff. We have staff at every level that give input to this and a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of support to make this happen and do a great job of it. And with this being Tom's last budget, I just really also as well want to thank him. Tom gives excellent leadership. He's extremely supportive of staff, both when we need to make the difficult decisions in removing things or deferring things or balancing things off, but also knowing when to move forward some areas. We really appreciate his involvement over the many years. He helps this process as well go very smooth and really well. So thank you, Tom. And I'll pass it back to the chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was pretty detailed, and what a wonderful job you've done with the budget, to be honest. Are there any comments or questions to Mr. Jansen? Your Worship?
Yeah, I also want to commend Mr. Jansen and his staff, all of the town directors, of course, Mr. Cookett, for the leadership that all of you have shown over the years. This municipality is very fortunate that we've had good budgeting and good financial oversight over the past couple of terms of council, for sure, that I'm familiar with, and I'm sure that went even before then, because my recollection is that the previous councilors were the ones that started the allocation of funding specifically to infrastructure needs for our asset management. I did want to ask a couple of questions, if I might share. And the first one had to do with the asset management plan. So one of the slides, I think it was slide number 9, which showed the comparisons between the municipalities, and Fort Erie, I think, now ranks 4th or there, yes. That includes the tax levy and the water wastewater rates. And I believe that this may have been, Fort Erie may have been going further to the left, that is, getting closer to the top of the bottom of the list. And would you anticipate that that would continue, having regard to the amount of money that we've been allocating towards infrastructure renewal?
Through the chair to Mayor Redekop, I believe that would be the case. I know there's a lot of, we want to do what we believe is best and right for the town of Fort Erie. But when we do see our neighbors, we know that there's many that have said that they either are still in plans to raise some of that funding for infrastructure, or they've instituted a separate infrastructure levy to increase that gap. So the fact that we're into more of the maintenance mode with inflation would in many ways point to that pressure at least being removed or minimized in this area.
Right, and if I might share, the second question had to do with regional tax policy that you mentioned will be under review in, I think, April. You didn't sound like you anticipate that there would be any changes. And I suppose if there aren't any changes, then we wouldn't expect any alteration in the numbers that you've presented tonight in terms of the region's budget, the municipality's budget, and the impacts on the residents.
Right. We usually, it is a conversation with area treasurers and the region, and I know different regional councillors will take an interest in what some of the changes could be, and typically the region will bring forward 3, 4, 5 different scenarios. What it mostly is looking at the tax class ratios. That's the biggest impact for a presentation for this tonight. So if the residential ratio is 1, then in relation, all other tax classes are put forward in relation to that, and there's certain provincial ranges and acceptable thresholds that you can use, but if the commercial would be proposed to be coming down in relation to residential or in comparison to other tax property classes like industrial, it can put additional pressure on the residential portion. Of course, the underlying thing there is that it's providing relief to others. Because it's a ratio, it's just how that burden is distributed. And they've been very good at bringing forward modest changes year to year, so that's where I would generally say that, we don't expect impacts that would be too significant.
Just kind of a supplement to that, have you been engaged in any discussions that would indicate that there may be some policy changes that might affect the residential taxpayers?
No, we have not had any of those conversations yet. I might be able to look up last year's report to show an example of the number of scenarios that were brought forward and what the impacts would have been to the residential taxpayer, but we haven't had that discussion yet.
Right. I know that there have been a couple of potential changes floated at the region in recent months, which regional council has not supported. Just then on a process approach, you did indicate, we do have these 9 separate categories, and within these categories, I think the first 4, there are some specific projects. The budget chair and I had a discussion before the meeting of how we would like to move this along, but are there specific, is it the intention of staff to make reference to each of these items within each part, to give a little bit of explanation as to what's in it?
I would suggest we move through those, much like we do with the capital project worksheets, as a separate item, and then we can review each of them and ask if councillors have questions regarding any one of those. And then if there are amendments, we can capture that and track that as we go. But I would suggest we go through each part of the supplementaries one by one with questions, and then go back later to the formal recommendations for approval. So I do have slides if that's where we're ready to.
Well, I think we're going to need to do that, because otherwise we're going to be staying here for a long time, and I think it's helpful for the public that may be watching this to see what's behind some of these things.
Yeah.
Some of us have already had an opportunity to look at what you're presenting, and there have been some various reports that have touched on that. But if you've got slides, that would be great. Otherwise, back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any more questions with regards to Jonathan before he moves away from the podium? Seeing none, we'll get, maybe we'll take 5 minutes and then we'll get started. Okay, thank you. So we're going to get started here and go through part one, that council approves the following supplementary based budget funding for 2022, subject to previous reports and resolutions. Jonathan? Oh, you want to do the library first?
And Chair, I'll move the recommendation with respect to the library report, which is CBC 04-2022.
Any comments or questions? Your worship?
I just want to say that, and I probably should have said it when the delegation was here, that we've been very fortunate in Fort Erie. We've had leading edge library service in this community for as long as I can remember, going back over 30 years. From the time when they first automated the library, which was among the vanguard of libraries in Ontario at the time, late 80s, until now, where we have consistently seen year after year after year very good financial management of the library's budget, and the community really supports our library. We are one of the few communities our size that would have 3 library branches, and that in itself is a challenge. But I was particularly interested in the comparisons that they showed in terms of where we are in terms of funding our library, but then the number of hours that the library is actually operating. So we've got a library system that has 3 libraries to serve our residents. They operate far more hours than other communities in Niagara for the same dollars. So the return to the residents of Fort Erie is exceptional, and the board and the CEO of the library and the staff should be commended. So I commend them.
Thank you, Worship. Anybody else? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move CBC 05-2022.
Thank you very much. All in favor? Or, sorry, Your Worship?
I just had one question, because this was a topic of discussion at a corporate services subcommittee meeting, and Mr. Jansen did somewhat touch on it, and that is the length of time now between the last general assessment of all properties in Ontario until the next one. Typically, it's been 4 years. Increases have been phased in over 4 years. Now we're going to be looking at 6 or 7 years, and I wonder if he's got some comments on that, because when this comes out, there will be a lot of questions by residents and a lot of concerns by residents, some of whom may be significantly effective, some of whom may not. But the one area that Mr. Jansen may want to comment on in particular is new housing, where there's a delay in us getting the assessment information, number one, and number two, what happens when there is a reassessment for those new properties.
Mr. Jansen?
Sorry. Your mic is on now.
Okay, thanks. The reassessment process is handled by MPAC, and I know we have a lot of information on our website to point residents there. But yeah, some of the factors for it being a 7-year delay, the province was trying to provide as much stability throughout COVID, which is appreciated, but the issues just compound over that many years. Typically, in the first year of a 4-year reassessment, any increase will be phased in over the following 4 years. So even when it comes to this next reassessment, we don't really have an indication of, again, whether that will be the case with it having been delayed the 3 years. It'll have been 7 years, and currently for the 2022 budget, assessment is still based on values from January 1st of 2016, so very outdated, particularly in our market right now. So, we do rely on MPAC for providing accurate information. The risks and the issues really are the two that I highlighted before. If all 40 reassessment goes up by 50% in this new reassessment for the 2024 budget, there will be no impacts of that increased assessment to the homeowners, because if everyone's goes up 50%, your assessment is truly the denominator on which we distribute our tax needs. The problem is when neighboring homes and subdivisions experience different variations in that increase. So if one subdivision has a 50% increase, another has 40, another has 60, for example, there will be variations in how that burden is impact. Again, the expectation is that there'll be 4 years to phase in that impact, but that is a major thing. And what we did experience back in the 2017 budget, you may recall, I know we highlighted that quite a bit, and it was one of your first budgets of this term. Maybe not, I can't remember. Anyway, the issue was that before the town did anything, there was a shift from the non-residential taxpayer to the residential taxpayer of about 4, I think maybe even over 4%. So while that's great news for non-residential taxpayers, it's not great news for the others. So it's those variations and inequities potentially. In theory, it's not an inequity because the tax system is designed to be based on what assessment is, what your home is valued at. But that is where, and I think in a year like that, we may expect issues of tax policy, issues of tax ratios to be more of a concern if the residential is seen to be carrying much more, and that may not be the case either, but then we may have a need to examine that more closely in those years. And the other point I did mention earlier is that we typically do see more appeals at the beginning of a reassessment cycle, so we know those kinds of impacts, and homeowners should be encouraged to make sure that their assessment is fair and accurate. But we would expect that to be more of an issue early on with the next reassessment. So a number of factors. I don't know if I answered well enough your question, but that's
great.
comments.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair.
Anybody else on that? Thank you. Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, let's move CBC 06-2020.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's my fault. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Dubanow?
Now I would like to move, Mr. Chair, CBC-06-2022.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Okay, at this point, I recommend we go through all the supplementaries before we come to any of the other questions we might have, but just to systematically move through those 22 supplementary items. The first one should be on your screen, 1.1, for the capital reserve increase to the bridge and culverts refurbishing. So each one of these, you'll see down the right side a highlight of the impacts with the amounts and the percentage for 22, as well as any future year. So it does say the same amount there because this is a base amount that doesn't change for those future years. As well as a description, report reference where applicable at the bottom. There are actual supplementary forms that have more information, more descriptions and project rationale in your project or in your capital packages, but this is a summary for everyone to follow along with. So if you want to guide us through each one of these for any questions, then I will advance the slides as we go through each one.
So are there any comments or questions with regards to 1.1? Seeing none, we'll move on.
Any questions? Yeah, well, I won't speak directly to each one. Council, these are summarized in the earlier presentation, and the general information is here. But as we move through each one, if you want to maybe note the expense impact, and then just identify if there's any questions, and then we can move through each one.
Okay, does anybody have any comments or questions with regards to 1.2? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. I did have an opportunity of talking to Mr. Walsh about about this particular project. I'm very much in favor of the rural ditching, but I asked what happens with the urban. But I understand that the urban is not covered in this budget, in this supplementary budget, but it is covered on an ongoing basis through the rest of the general levy budget. So I didn't want people to think who lived in urban areas that we were forgetting about them.
Anything further?
No.
Anybody else? And then we'll move on to 1.3. Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment with regard to the designated heritage grant program. I think this is a phenomenal idea to, to work together with property owners to be able to preserve some of our built heritage here in the town. We've had some challenges with that, and certainly I think it's a good idea to work together, put some money aside for this, because once you lose these heritage properties, that's it, they're gone. So you gotta do the work before ahead of time. So I'm happy to see this. Just a quick comment, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else? We'll move on to 1.4. The outdoor public space winter maintenance. Any comments or questions? Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Can we just get a little more information on what outdoor spaces we're talking about?
Jonathan?
Mr. Walsh. Want to direct to Mr. Walsh?
I didn't see him up there. Mr. Walsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Councillor Lubberts. Through the course of the past couple of years, Council has requested additional services through a number of our outdoor facilities that don't receive service in the winter due to apparent low use, which is changing with the COVID issues. We've got more people staying home, more people getting physically active in the winter, which is great. So the amounts requested is to convert a casual staff into a full-time staff, so that we now have the opportunity to collect garbage from all of our parks on a regular basis. In addition, we have a number of parking lots that we don't plow right now, and that was outlined in our winter control plan presented in late 2019. There's been requests for service in there. This will free up staff to attack those after snows that we're having right now and a couple of Mondays ago.
Councillor Lubberts?
Yeah, so as far as the parking lots, which ones will be included now?
Specifically, we're adding Waverly and Waterfront Park.
Okay, all right.
That seems to be where the most demand is right now.
Thank you.
Anything further? Your Worship?
Yeah, thank you. And again, this would go to Mr. Walsh. We, I and other members of council, I'm sure, receive periodic requests, particularly during the winter months, about snow clearing on the recreation trail. And this has been raised, I know, in the past, and in the past you've responded to me. Most recently, I received an email from a resident who asked about this particular issue and thought that it would blend in nicely with our active transportation program and approach in the municipality. You provided me with a response and indicated that there's more than the financial aspects. There are actually some trail aspects that we have some commitments to. I wonder if Mr. Walsh could comment on that, Chair.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes, I can. Thank you. When the Friendship Trail was created, I think back in 1999, predates my time at the town. Nonetheless, one of the commitments made in receiving funding for that and its integration into the Trans-Canada Trail was that the Friendship Trail be provided with winter outdoor activities. In this case, we're using the Friendship Trail as a cross-country skiing opportunity. That's our contribution in there. Notwithstanding the financial aspect, I think the town could afford to maintain this, but it is an issue maintaining if we were to go to bare pavement. There are sunny spots and shady spots, and it would lead to ice creation and increased liability on the town's front.
Yeah, thank you very much. So over the years, I've used the trail a fair bit. I can't recall the number of times when I've seen people with skis on, not very many. I've seen a lot of people running. I've seen unauthorized motorized vehicles, and I haven't seen anybody with snowshoes, but that might be something that we could follow up, and maybe that's something that we can have a discussion about during the coming year, with a view to seeing whether, if there are some commitments that we've made to the Trans-Canada Trail organization, maybe there are some other ways that we can deal with this. So thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh.
Pleasure.
So we'll move on to 1.5, which is the short-term rental inspector and administrative cost. Comments or questions? We'll move on to the next one, which is the 1.6, the $66,000 for a living wage initiative. Comments or questions? I just have one, maybe I could direct it to Mr. Cook. In the $66,000, are the crossing guards covered under this program?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're at the end of part one. Oh, okay. Your worship?
I was just going to wonder if we could vote on the items in part one. Is that where you were going?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So we're at the end of part one. So all in favor? Carried. Thank you. So we'll move on to part two. The council approves the following supplementary one-time funding for 2022, subject to previous reports and resolutions. We'll go to 2.1, which is the Passed On Mental Health Walk-In Grant. Comments or questions? Then we'll move on to 2.2. The $75,000 for STR land use controls. Comments, questions? We'll move on to 2.3, which is $50,000 for the secondary plan supplemental studies. Your worship?
I did have a question about this. There's a reference to the region may require that the town undertake some studies, and I guess a comment on, is it typical for us to do this when there are large areas that the regional official plan is affecting? I don't know who that would go to. I don't know if...
Your worship, it's Alec Hurley
Alex is
speaking.
here. Yes.
Okay, Alex.
So I'm not quite sure that I understood the question. So the region's official plan sets out for secondary plans a number of studies that would have to be conducted. Some of the studies were completed by the landowners in this secondary plan area, which of course is one of the reasons that this secondary plan moved forward. But there would be some other studies, such as archaeological examination that wasn't yet done, that the region could ask for. So there are a number of studies that they outline in their official plan that we would have to meet unless we can convince them that this would not be the case. So it's a it's untested water at the moment. They outline which studies would be needed, and we're hoping to convince them that we would get away with the fewest numbers. The environmental study, for instance, that I mentioned, already done. We would likely need to have that peer reviewed to make sure that the material is accurate. So that would be one of the studies that we'd be looking at.
That is helpful, and I guess my question really was more directed to why would the municipality be doing archaeological assessments on private land? Why would the region expect us to do that?
Mr. Hurlowitz?
Yeah, well, because so the municipality is responsible for doing the secondary planning. In this case, we are getting some direction from the developers and landowners. So we would be working cooperatively with them. So that would be part of it. We could try and seek some of those costs back from the landowners as well.
I see. So I guess I think you've just answered the question. For us to be able to create a secondary plan that actually could be functional to be used as a guide for the future development in any given area, the municipality itself should be at least undertaking some of these studies to determine with certainty that those uses could be implemented.
Yes, and they would identify any mitigation or other measures that would have to be undertaken to eliminate any possible impacts on future residents.
Right. Thanks very much, Mr. Hurlowitz. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
So we'll move on to 2.4, which is $150,000 for climate change studies and initiatives. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
We're not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that the end?
Do you have a question?
No, if we're at the end of part 2.
Okay. I beg your pardon?
If we're at the end of part 2, you're right. You're going to call a question.
All in favor, part 2? Thank you. So we'll move on to part 3. The council approves the following supplementary base budget new funding request for 2022. 3.1, $250,000 for Affordable Housing Community Improvement Plan Fund. Comments or questions? Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very happy to see this here. It again goes back to the idea of the heritage funding. This funding will facilitate us to promote and encourage the construction of affordable housing here in Fort Erie, which I think goes without saying is a challenge in this municipality, in all municipalities across Niagara, and indeed most of the province. It was one of the things that I took very seriously getting into this job. It's something I've talked about quite often, and I'm very happy to see a community improvement program to be able to help out with development charges and other things to bring those costs down and to encourage builders who are willing to build affordable housing. So I think this is phenomenal. I'm very happy to see it here, see it renewed and funded on an annual basis. And I just wanted to say that because I think this is something important that a lot of individuals in our community are talking about and looking out for. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Anybody else? We'll move on to 3.2, $25,000 for expansion of transit hours of operations pilot. Comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to 3.3, $69,145 for junior community planner, PDS. Comments or questions? We'll move on to 3.4, $124,054 for senior building plumbing inspector, staffing costs. Any comments or questions with regards to that, Your Worship?
I just want to point out that there are the previous item that you referred to, this current one, the next two, all of which relate to the growth that's taking place in this community. And the town has been undergoing significant growth, as everyone who drives around the town can see. That has placed tremendous pressure on the planning staff in order to process approval applications, building permit applications, do the inspections with respect to all of the construction that's taking place, oversee and plan for the amenities that we want to have available for our residents, so that we have been generating significant building permit fees over the last few years, and this hiring is required in order to ensure that we can keep up with what we believe is going to be a continuing surge in growth. And so these positions are needed, and the revenues are coming in from the building department, and all of these really relate to planning and building. So I think that that's the context. So when people see that the town is hiring all these people, well, they're hiring these people because they're desperately needed in order for us to be able to respond to the growth challenges that we're faced with.
Anybody else? Seeing none, we'll move on to 3.5, $44,880 for zoning technician PDS. Anybody? Moving on to 3.6, $88,510 for project manager parks facility staffing costs. Comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll vote on this block 3. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. So we'll move on now to part 4. The council approves the following supplementary one-time new funding requests for 2022. 4.1, $50,000 for Hyman Avenue ditching improvements funded by the GLRS reserve. Comments or questions? We'll move on to 4.2, $50,000 for Maple Leaf Avenue North ditching improvements funded by the GLRS reserve. Any comments or questions with regards to that? Move on to 4.3, $100,000 for former Ridgeway Works Yard Phase 2 ESA funded by the GLRS reserve. Comments or questions? Councillor Noyes?
Yes, yes, I just wanted to comment in regards to many times, or sometimes, or hopefully this time, there is some other funding from different levels of government when you're looking at doing this type of work and for the environment. And so I'm hoping that we are once again successful in getting some money towards this project.
Anything further? Thank you. 4.4, $35,000 for updating traffic bylaws funded by the GLRS reserve. Comments or questions? We'll move on to 4.5, $150,000 for new official plan funded by $67,500 from the DC reserve and $82,500 from the GLRS reserve. Comments or questions? And 4.6, $103,000 for Fort Erie International Academy pool for summer operation funded by the GLRS reserve. Comments or questions? Councillor Noyes?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, and I think it's great that we're developing a synergy and partnership with the Academy, but I'm noticing the dates through the week. Are those, like, the pool's going to operate between Tuesday through Saturday? Is there a reason why it's not, Sunday's not included? Is that perhaps a staffing issue or that the academy needs it for their own purposes?
Mr. Cricket?
Through your chair, the councillor, you're absolutely right. It's for both reasons. It's staffing. We do feel it's going to be an issue just to staff on the days that we've identified here, but as well as the academy would like it for that day, the Sundays.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Then we'll, all in favor of Part 4? Opposed, if any? Carried. So we'll move on to Part 5. The council approves the following grants for 2022. 5.1 is $24,750 for the Port Erie Reliance Senior Citizens Complex. Any comments or questions with regards to that? Seeing none, we'll move on to 5.2, $33,536 for business area watering. Comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll move to 5.3, $19,235 for Beachcomber Seniors Complex. Comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll move to 5.4, $1,000 for Port Erie Horticultural Society. Comments, questions? Seeing none, we'll move to Part 5.5, $36,850 for community events. Comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll move to Parts 5.6, $1,578,898 for the public library. Comments, questions? That concludes Part 5. All in favor of Part 5? Carried. So we'll move to Part 6. The council approves the following 2022 Business Improvement Area BIA levies. 6.1, $40,700 for Bridgeburg Station BIA. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to 6.2, $35,000 for Ridgeway BIA levy. Comments or questions? Seeing none, moving on to 6.3, $15,000 for Crystal Beach BIA levy. That concludes Part 6. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Part 7, that council amends the 2022 capital budget as per Appendix 2 to report number CBC 01-2022 to substitute $516,000 of sanitary sewer refurbishing reserve funding, $450,000 of water refurbishing reserve funding, and $131,495 of road refurbishing reserve funding with the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. Formula-based grant for the Idlewild Sanitary Sewer Project. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. Part 8, that council approves the 2022 general levy of $30,542,350 comprised of a base budget of $29,382,380 and a supplementary budget of $1,159,970 and approves the 2022 general capital budget of $12,910,697 and direct staff to submit the related bylaws. Comments or questions? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Part 9, that council excludes capital asset amortization of $7.3 million from the 2022 general levy operating budget. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. There'll be No date of next meeting?
No need for another meeting unless
Mr.
Mr.
Crockett?
Jansen wants to come.
If I can, Chair, just briefly, I want to thank Council for approving this budget. This, we brought forward over $1 million worth of subs, probably the most ever, which included hiring of new staff, and which is very difficult for Council to approve. But I think it's very necessary. As the mayor has stated, we've got immense growth, and the only way that we can keep up providing excellent customer service is to increase our staff complement. So greatly appreciate the support, the support for this budget, and a big thanks to Mr. Jansen once again.
Thank you, Mr. Crockett. And thank you, Mr. Jansen. And I think you know how council feels about your work and your department. And you know what? If I was so lucky to have a financial advisor like you, I would be a very wealthy person. And I know that. I know that people don't realize it, but our treasurer treats your money just like his money. And normally when Jonathan opens up his wallet, the moss all come out. So, we give you the great credit that you deserve. You certainly do deserve that. So could we get a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Carry it. Thanks for making my night easy.
Thank you, Chair. You did an excellent job.